I do hope you brought your Bibles tonight, as we've suggested beforehand, because in this particular series now, we're going to be going back to the Bible, and I'm going to be pointing out various verses, and it's good for you to be able to open it up and look at them and mark them or whatever you would want to do, but to be able to put it together and see the story here about the prophets. Now, as you can see tonight, we've got more about the prophets before we study their books. Before we turn to Amos and begin to look at those particular books, we got some more history that we want to talk about. Now, it's very, very important for us to do this. It's very important because we're going back and we're going to go into the book of Kings, and we're going to be looking at that book. And as it gives those histories, we've already seen it bounces back and forth, and there's various things that keep our minds mixed up. And we'll be reading and we'll think, well, this is the king of Israel, and then no, it's a king of Judah, and back and forth it goes. And you have to really concentrate to be able to put it down to see which kings they're talking about. And you need to remember it's very, very important to know which king it is. Now, not just one particular thing about king, but the overall thing, as we're going to see, it's important to know that. Because one line of kings, Israel, is going to be a wicked line. And the ones in Judah is going to be part wicked and part good. One of these countries is going to be a powerful force, politically speaking, a powerful force militarily, and a powerful force as far as riches is concerned. And another is going to be exactly the opposite. It's going to be a poor country. And it's very important to get that straight in our mind. Because when we start reading these prophets and see which ones are talking to which countries, then it's going to ring our bell, and we're going to say, you know, that is very, very interesting. So I'm trying to say this to encourage you to not take this history we're studying lightly. It's very important for us to understand the prophets. And so oftentimes we say, let's get right into the prophets and see what they have to say. And then whatever they say, we can say, I wonder why they said that. And we don't know because we don't know the background or the history of them. So it's tremendously important to know the history of these minor prophets. Those of you who have been studying with Scott in the Thessalonians class, I think that your mind has just been absolutely turned upside down to see the importance of knowing when those books were written. When were they written? Why did Paul write them? What were they about? Who was it to? What were the people like? And once you understand his introductory material, you can just turn over to those books and pretty well read them, and you understand what it is all about. Well, the same thing is true with these books here. So we have to wade through history. Now, I'm going to try to make it a little more interesting, rather than just reading here and here and here and here, and throwing out a lot of names that means nothing to us. Be telling stories, but I want you to follow me along as we go through. Now, I'm going to be bringing up things, and here are things we studied last week, but here are things that we need to get firmly fixed in our mind. And that is that from Solomon down, there were two nations. There was the nation of Israel and the nation of Judah. And each one of them had their own kings. And their kings did particular and peculiar things. Here's a chart that we went through back and forth like this, but we're not going to do that tonight. We'll just kind of put it in this way. So as you look at it here, what I'm trying to say is that these kings are going to be dated by the other king. That you're going to see, well, down here, Rehoboam, his son Abijam. Now, he started reigning. What year did he start reigning? They didn't have any ADs or BCs. They didn't have any, so they say, well, when did he start reigning? And so the way that they date it is, they will say, this guy right here, this guy here, he started reigning in the so-and-so year of Jeroboam. Like in the 13th year of Jeroboam, he began to reign. Then it'll tell you Jeroboam died, and this guy up here began to reign up here in Israel. Well, when did he begin to reign? Well, he began to reign in the 3rd year of this guy down here. And so then you say, well, then he died and Asa began to reign. When? Well, he died in the 12th year of this king up here. And they go back and forth, and they date themselves by the king of the other nation, of the king of the other nation. So that throws a confusion in us because as we're reading it, we have these kings all thrown together that's in here. Then we pointed out that over here we have the prophets, and you can see I have them scattered around. Now, they preach at different times under different circumstances. And we've already studied this. The reason I'm not going to go through it, I'm going to go through it fast. But we have Isaiah, Hosea, Amos, and Micah. They preached right here. And next week we'll be able to see how we know that they preached right here. But they preached right here at this time. Jeremiah preached down here when Josiah was a king. Nahum and Habakkuk and Zephaniah preached down here when Jehoiakim was a king. And so over here, Daniel, Ezekiel, and Esther, they lived and they spoke during the captivity. And then these men over here, they spoke after they came out of the captivity. Now, the history of the nation is totally different. Absolutely, totally different. When you go and you read in Amos, and you read his content and what he has to say, and then you say, well, I believe that I'll go over here and read Haggai. No similarities. No similarities whatsoever. Well, why wouldn't they be? Because it's a totally different time under totally different circumstances. And the men have totally different jobs to do. They over here, these people are going to be condemning Israel. And they're going to be saying, woe unto you. If you don't straighten up, here's what God is going to do. He's going to take you into captivity. Well, God did that back in 722 BC. But then when you get down here to Haggai, we find here this country, Judah, they didn't go into captivity until 586 BC. And then they were in there for 70 years. Then they came out. And now then, when you read about these men, they're talking to a nation who's already been in captivity. They've already been cleansed of idolatry. They are now free. They've come back home. And now what are they supposed to do? So now then, the tone is totally different. Now then, they are encouraging. They are saying, here in this, do this. Instead of condemning, now then, they're encouraging. And there's a totally different reason why. And so unless we understand the background, then we miss a great deal in this situation here. So here we have now, also last week we pointed out, the book of 1st and 2nd Kings, the first book of 1st and 2nd Chronicles. Both of them give you the history that we're going to be studying about. Both of them give you the history of the kings of Israel and the kings of Judah. But here's the difference. As you're reading, you come along, and the book of 1st and 2nd Kings starts with Solomon. There it starts with Solomon and goes down until they go into captivity. And then as soon as you get through with 2nd Kings, the next book is 1st Chronicles. And 1st Chronicles starts with Adam and Eve, which doesn't make sense. But there's a reason. 1st and 2nd Chronicles gives you a review of the entire Old Testament. It goes back to Adam and Eve and starts out and gives you a review. It doesn't go into detail. 1st and 2nd Kings are going to go into details as far as the kings are concerned. 1st and 2nd Chronicles are just going to give you a verse or two. But it's important because a lot of times they give you some information that we don't find in 1st and 2nd Kings. So it's important for us to know that and be able to put them together. So now let's get to the new material tonight. The new material tonight, let's begin with the divided kingdom between Rehoboam and Jeroboam. here's a crude map that I have drawn. So we could put it in color, and you could get an idea that there's your 12 tribes that you have there. Now then, in these 12 tribes, we've already studied, God took 10 of them away and gave them to Rehoboam. And then he left 2 tribes, that's Benjamin and Judah, and he gave them to Rehoboam. I think the others he gave to Jeroboam. See, I'm getting guys mixed up too. So he gave these others okay, I looked down there and it kind of threw me. I've got it right. He gave Jeroboam these 10 tribes, and he gave Rehoboam these 2 tribes. Now, when you go down to Chronicles, you can read down there, and Rehoboam dwelled in Jerusalem, built cities, and so forth. And then it says, and Judah and Benjamin belongeth unto him. So there's how we know Judah and Benjamin go together. But there are many passages that say that. So we see now, there's the way that the thing is going to be divided. Now here's a professional map. And in this map, here the guy has drawn these tribes. And down here, in that yellow, is Benjamin and Judah. So the first thing to remember, who is the largest country as far as land is concerned? Well, Israel is much larger than Judah. And we're going to see that all this is going to be tied in this. Now then, let's start here, and we're going to look at Jeroboam's calves. Now, Jeroboam, in 1 Kings 12, so you can turn your Bible open there, that's where we'll be starting, talking about Jeroboam's calves. Now, you're going to hear about these calves all the way through the Old Testament. So we just as well stop, look at them, and say, what about these calves, this Jeroboam's calves in here? Okay, as we go to chapter 12, here we find then that it starts out and it tells what Rehoboam had done and Jeroboam and so forth. Rehoboam, he'd started out and he went by the wayside in here in raising the taxes of his dad. But now then, when we get down to verse 25, I guess it is, now we come to Jeroboam. And let's see what Jeroboam did. It said, now, Jeroboam built these cities here and so forth. Verse 26, and Jeroboam said in his heart, now will the kingdom return to the house of David. If this people go up to offer sacrifices in the house of Jehovah at Jerusalem, then will the heart of this people turn again unto their Lord, even unto Rehoboam, king of Judah, and they will kill me and return to Rehoboam, king of Judah. That's real important. Here's what Jeroboam thought. Jeroboam now thinks, I have all of these tribes here. But now, where did God say the Jews were to worship? 3 times a year, they were to go to Jerusalem. So Jeroboam has his own 10 tribes. And like any good politician, he says, now look, if my people go down to Jerusalem 3 times a year, and they worship down there, their heart is going to return to Jerusalem where Rehoboam is reigning. And their heart will turn against me, and it'll return back to Rehoboam. So I've got to stop that. I've got to do something to keep my 10 tribes away from Jerusalem and Rehoboam. So he says in verse 28, whereupon the king took counsel and made 2 calves of gold, and he said unto them, it is too much for you to go to Jerusalem. Behold the gods, O Israel, thy gods, O Israel, which brought thee up out of the land of Egypt. And he set the one in Bethel and the other in Dan. Now, here it is. He said, I tell you what we're going to do. I'm going to make 2 gods. I'm going to make 2 calves. And he put one in Bethel. And he put one up in Dan, one at the south end of his tribes, one at the north end of his tribes. And he said, now, O Israel, here are your gods. These are the gods that brought you out of Egypt. Now, he's doing this, and then he gave them a good exhortation. He said, it's too much for you to go to Jerusalem. we're asking too much out of you to go to Jerusalem the way the Bible says you ought to go. Now, from Bethel down to Jerusalem, which is that red dot, it's about 13 miles. So it's too far for you to travel down there. So I'm going to make it easy on you. We're going to set up these places of worship up here, and you're going to have your gods up there. Now in verse 30, and this thing became a sin, for the people went to worship before the one, even unto Dan. And he made houses of high places, and made priests from among all the people that were not of the sons of Levi. So now he sets up a new priesthood. Not going to be after the tribe of Levi, the way God said. He's going to make his own priesthood. So Jeroboam is setting up a totally new religion and a totally new God. It's going to be built on 2 golden calves, and they're going to worship then around all of this there. Now, he goes on and on and on. He talks about this. And down in verse 33, about the middle of it, said, even in the month which had devised out of his own heart. Now, he devised a month instead of the time when God said. He devised his own times, and he ordained a feast for the children of Israel, and went up unto the altar to burn incense. So now then, Jeroboam has started a new religion out of Israel, the 10 tribes of Israel. And they now are going to start worshiping in that particular situation. So these golden calves are going to be the downfall of Israel. Now, I've got here, it said up in Dan, kind of give you an idea about Dan. That's a real city. A lot of times we just have names. There's the city of Dan. Dan is a real city you can go visit today. Now there's the wall that goes around Dan. Very powerful wall, very big wall, as you can see in the height of that individual right there. Now, as you go into the gate, you're going in and going to go through that gate, and you'll see those pillars and posts that are out there. And this is the gate of Dan. Bring it a little bit more. As you can see that you would go in, and you'd go to the left, and that's where you go through the gate. Now, why would the gate be so narrow? See? Here we have a gate. Why would it be so narrow? They built these great walls and built these gates so that they would be a protection if an army came. If you have a great big wide gate, an army would cut through it. But this is about 8 feet wide. And so if you had 1 million soldiers out there trying to get into Dan, they'd have to come in through this little narrow gate. And these people had little coves that's up there. They'd take their spears, and as they came through, just ping, 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 and 6 men could kill 1 million people because you couldn't get in. It was very ingenious the way they had the thing. But here for our purpose here tonight, we see over here where Steve Daniels is standing there. You have this, whatever you want to call it, that's where the king would sit at the gate. That would be either the king or the chief priest, the chief man, for their judgments. This is going to be the judgment place where people would come to be judged. So the people in Dan, if they had a problem one with the other, they would come down to this place and they would tell their problems just like we would tell it in a court. And here you have this chief, and then you have these other men, these other judges that are sitting out here. That's there. Now, here it is. This is, you read such places. Her husband is known in the gates when he sitteth among the elders of the land. See, that doesn't make sense to us. Her husband is known in the gates. Well, so what? Doesn't make any difference to us. But what it's really saying is that her husband is known down in the courthouse. The husband is known down among the rulers of the courts. And then over here again, and there came 2 angels. Now this is when they went down to Sodom. There came 2 angels to Sodom at eve, and Lot sat in the gate of Sodom. So there Lot is going to be sitting there. Well, what's he going to be sitting there? Lot was a very prestigious man. He was a man that was a judge of the city of Sodom. Now this gives you another situation, and you'd say, isn't that a coincidence that these two angels came down and they just happened to run into Lot? No, they didn't just happen to run into him. That's the only way they could get in town. So they came in to go through the gate, and it was eventime. All the places closed up, but Lot is still there. He's the last guy that's leaving. And so then he says, come on home with me. So when you read in your Old Testament about the gates, that's what it is talking about. That guy that's standing up there, I think, is Lot. If you don't recognize him, it's really Oliver. But down here are the stones that go off, and this is where the judges would sit. So the big guy, the chief, he would sit under between those poles, and then the others would sit there, and there's your courthouse. So they didn't call it that, they called it the gate. So if you sat in the gate, you were the most important man in the city. Okay, you go through the gate, then you got a little time to walk. You don't just start straight in. You walk up, and the city is going to be up here on a hill. Now, when you get up on that hill, here is an interesting thing. This is the actual altar of Jeroboam. This is where Jeroboam built his golden calf and put his golden calf up there where I put it right there. Now, if you look down here, this over here is, gotta get the thing back here. I'm not used to using this laser to hit the wrong button. This over here, as you can see, is made out of modern day material. They've made this to show that's where the altar was. That's where Jeroboam made his altar and made it, patterned it after Jerusalem, and they would offer their sacrifices on that altar up to that golden calf, up to their God. So there's the altar, and there's where they would take it and offer it up there to the golden calf. Now I want you to notice a big tree that's right here. Big tree, and you're going to find, as you go through, it'll say, and they worshiped under every green tree. Well, what would that mean if, suppose you ask me about some church, and I said, oh, you don't want to go there, they worship under every green tree. You say, what do you mean? It wouldn't make sense. Well, when they made their altars in those days, they did two things. They built it on a high place, and they built them under a tree. Now, if you want to know why they built them under a tree, go to eastern Washington where there are no trees, and would you rather be under a shade or would you rather be out in the open, you see? And so over here, there were no trees around, so they would find a nice, comfortable place where there was shade to put their gods, and then they would build this high place. Now, that's a high place. As you can see, here are the steps that you would go up there, in there, come up, and here are the steps that you would take, and you're going up now unto a high place. So as you're thinking about a high place, I don't want you to think about way up in the air. So the term high place is going to be used over and over and over again in the Old Testament. And it's going to say, and they went up to the high place. And later on it'll talk about a king. And it'll say, now the king did that which was good, but he didn't destroy the high places. And you say, well, why should high places be destroyed? What it says is, the king did that which is good, but he didn't destroy idolatrous worship, because high places is just another word to show about that particular thing there. Now, as we look at this, we see the high place, just another place there gives you a little better and more clear picture of what a high place right in here would be. Now this, by the way, is a heathen high place. Heathens had their high places, and this is an actual high place that is now, and they've uncovered it at Megiddo. So you can see it's, 5 feet high, I would guess, about 5 feet high, but it's a high place. It's where you go up and worship there. So this is a heathen high place. So you're going to hear about high places. High places among the Jews, high places among the heathens that are in here. Now, that's what Jeroboam did. He made a high place under a green tree, and he set up a totally different religion. This is for the 10 tribes of Israel. Now, God didn't just strike him dead. God gave him a chance to do something about that. So I want us to note the mercy of God. Now then you turn to the 13th chapter, and I'm just going to tell the story, and you can read it, you can see what the story is. God takes a young man down out of Judah, and he sends him up there to the high place. And he said, now I want you to go up to the high place, and I want you to cry out against Jeroboam. That means preach against Jeroboam. And go up there and say, God is going to tear down this high place. He's going to go up to Bethel's where it's going to be. He's going to tear down this high place, and he's going to do a lot of damage because you have set up this thing that's not pleasing to God. And so he tells them that, and Jeroboam wants to know, well, how do I know that you came from God? And so he said, well, I'm going to give you a sign. And the sign is that your hand is going to wither. And it just turned leprosy. It just withered away. It's a warning. He can't move it. And so he prays to the young man. He said, oh, please ask God to restore my arm. And he said, okay, I'll ask him, and he will. So he asked him, and his arm came back, and now then it's again. Now, would that impress you? If you were there and that happened to you, what would you do? Well, Jeroboam said, I'm not changing. He didn't. It didn't impress him. I'm not changing. But I want you to come home. I want you to come home with me, and I'll give you half of my kingdom. So he's going to bless this young man beyond anything that the young man could possibly comprehend. The young man said, no, I can't. Because God told me to come up here and cry against this altar and to turn around and go back a different way that I came and not eat or drink anywhere on my journey. So I'm supposed to walk 13 miles, do this, 13 miles back, and not eat or drink. So he said, I wouldn't eat with you if you gave me half of your kingdom. He turns around and heads home. Now here's where a heart-rending situation comes in. There's some people there that heard him, and so the boys, and they went home, told their dad, who was an old prophet. And they said, God sent a young prophet up, and he did this. And the old man said, which way did he go? And they said, well, he went down. They told him. He said, go out and saddle my donkey. They saddled it for the old prophet. He got on it, and he caught the young man. Got a hold of him. He said, young man, said, I want you to come back. Said, I'm a prophet myself. I want you to come back and eat with me. And the young man said, I would not come back and eat with you because God told me, go up one way, come back another way, and don't eat or drink. So no way would I come back and eat with you. And he said, well, I'm an old prophet myself. Been prophesying for many years. And God told me to come and get you and have you to come back and eat with me. And so the young man thought, well, if that's what God wants, that's what I'll do. But it says, but the old prophet lied unto him. The young man, thinking that that's what God said, turned around, went back home with the old prophet, and ate with him. And while he was eating with the old prophet, God did speak through the old prophet. And God told the old prophet, and the old prophet told him, he said, now because you didn't obey me, and you didn't do what I told you to do, you're not going to get home alive. So that's where the sad thing is. And you'd say, but the young man thought, and the guy lied. Here's a good illustration for us. These things are written for our learning. How important is it to keep the details of God's commandments? And you'd say, well, I thought. or somebody else told me. Somebody told me that's a lot smarter than somebody else. Here's a good illustration. So the old man told him, okay, take my donkey and go home. So he got on his donkey, he went back a different way. He got down there a ways, and a lion came out and killed him. And a report came, the old prophet went down, and he found the young man's body lying there. The lion had killed him. And the donkey standing on one side, and the lion on the other side. The lion hadn't eaten his body, and the lion hadn't bothered the donkey, and they were just standing there looking. So the old man picked him up, brought his body home, and buried it in a tomb, and said, when I die, I want you boys to bury me in the tomb where he was buried. Very sad story, but it's a fact of life. And it's a fact of life that we can learn a great lesson with today. How important is it to keep the commandments of God? Now, Rehoboam gave up his chance. God performed a miracle on him. He threw it away. Nope, he wasn't going to take that particular situation there. Then we come down and it said, after this thing Jeroboam returned not from his evil way, but made again from among all the people priests of the high places wherever he would consecrate him, that there might be priests of the high places. And this thing became a sin unto the house of Jeroboam, even to cut it off and destroy it from off the face of the earth. So now, think about this. Here it is. This thing became a sin. Now from here on, you're going to hear about kings 100 years down the line, 200 years down the line. And it'll say, and they did this, but they didn't depart from the sin of Jeroboam. And you'll know what that sin of Jeroboam is. It goes all the way down through, every time that you read. But they didn't depart from the sin of Jeroboam. That means they didn't depart and give up this calf worship. It stayed until the end. And God said, I'm going to destroy the lineage of Jeroboam off of the face of this earth. So, we find then the end of Jeroboam is recorded in 1 Kings 14, 1 through 20. So we turn to the next chapter, and here it tells about him. Now, again, I'm not going to be reading it. I'll point out certain verses. Down here he said in verse 7, Go tell Jeroboam, thus saith Jehovah the God of Israel, Forasmuch as I exalted thee from among the people and made thee a prince, that's the same as a king, a prince over my people Israel, and rent the kingdom away from the house of David and gave it to thee, yet thou hast not been as my servant David, who kept my commandments and who followed me with all his heart to do that which was right in mine eyes. He goes ahead and he said, You have done evil. Verse 10, Therefore, behold, I will bring evil upon the house of Jeroboam, and I will cut off from Jeroboam every man-child, him that is shut up and him that is left at large in Israel, and I'll utterly sweep away the house of Jeroboam as a man sweepeth away dung until it be gone. So he goes ahead and he describes that's in there. And your children are going to die. And goes ahead to tell how utterly, completely he will eradicate the family and the kingship of Jeroboam that's here. Now, he goes down and look at verse 16. He said, And he will give Israel up because of the sins of Jeroboam, which he has sinned, and wherewith he has made Israel to sin. And Jeroboam's wife arose and departed and came to Tisra, she said. And, well, I skipped over. That doesn't make sense until I get to here. Here in chapter 14, and what I'm talking about here is this. Jeroboam's son got really sick, and he was afraid he was going to die. Jeroboam knew that there was a prophet down there, and he told his wife, he said, Now, the prophet knows me, but I want you to dress up so he doesn't recognize you, and you go down to the prophet and you tell him that you have a sick boy and ask him to ask Jehovah if the boy will live or die. So she dressed up, went down to talk to this prophet, who was a true prophet, and on her way down, God spoke to the prophet. Now the prophet was very old, and he couldn't see, he was blind. God told the prophet, he said, now there's a woman coming, and she's dressed up, and she's not who she says she is. She says she's one person, but she's really Jeroboam's wife. And she's going to want to know, will her son live or die? And I want you to tell her that her son is going to die the minute she goes home and steps inside that city. That son will die. And her family is going to be totally, completely destroyed. And you tell her that her son dying will be the best thing that could happen, because he's the only one in the family who's going to die and be buried. And I'm going to let him die and be buried because he has some good things about him. But nobody else in your family will do that. The dogs are going to eat their bodies. You're going to die in the streets. You're going to die in the country. And you're not even going to have a decent burial. So, and then tell him, because he didn't obey me. Well, that's what it says. She comes and she asks him, and the old prophet tells her that very thing and sends her away. And then, as she goes back, when she set her foot inside that gate of that city, bang, her son died. And all of a sudden, certain destructive things came upon Jeroboam and destroyed them at that time. And so he was destroyed there, and my time is up, so I think that is where we had better stop. I do want to show you, though, this, that where we start next week, we're going to say, what was Rehoboam doing back in Judah? Now, tonight we've learned what Jeroboam was doing up there. Terrible, 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 terrible sins. But now, while Jeroboam was doing that, what was Rehoboam doing back down in Jerusalem? So we're going to read about that. Then after we get through with that, then we're going to see the next sin. Then we're going to see the next king. And we're going to take a look at these kings to see what they did. Here and here, up here and down here. What did they do? We want to get acquainted with them. So right now, here's what we know. Israel was a horrible, horrible nation. It was a horrible nation, a sinful nation. And if you want to find out what happened, what Judah was doing, you can go ahead and read those next verses, and you'll find out they were also turning to idolatry. But it wasn't as bad as the other. And you say, why? What's the difference in all these things? But that's where we'll pick up our story for next week. Should you be here tonight and understand your life is not right with God, if you need to be washed in the precious blood of His Son, would you respond while we stand, while we sing this song?